Let's start with multilingual families in education. In Estonia, as I said, it's a very hot topic now, languages in education, and during this year it has been prepared curriculum for kindergarten education, preschool education. Actually, it has been prepared twice, and now it's the third one in preparing stage. And there is a lot of discussion, and one of the issues raised during this discussion is one phrase from the document, and the phrase is multilingual families, they are problems for the educational system. Would you comment this?
Yeah, I mean, we hear that in many countries, multilingualism being viewed as a problem. And again, it's because of the monolingual lens. And because if we provide multilingual education is not easy. It requires a lot of resources, and it is expensive. So if the schools and if the educational system is monolingual, then it means there's going to be books only in one language. The teachers will have training in one language. Everything is going to be in one language. So some of the rhetoric from politicians is also because of financial reasons, and some are because of ideological reasons. So I'm not sure why it is a problem, have multilingual education been viewed as a problem. But if we come back to the issue of the language being a human right, then we have to offer education in the languages. We have to support the languages one way or another. So, yes, it is viewed as a problem, but I think there is a debate to be made. What are the advantages? And in my talk, I showed some advantages. If we support the other language, if we support the heritage language, then there can be some advantages in terms also of the majority language. Now, after my talk, we had a little chat with Ellen, and she said, well, does it matter if the heritage language has a different alphabet? Because in Greek has a different alphabet from English, and also Greek has a transparent orthography. So if you learn how to read and write in a transparent orthography, maybe it's easier than to read and write in an opaque orthography like English. And so this could be a reason why it brought an advantage. Now, within the Estonian context, you know, what are the languages? It's Estonian, it's Russian, and then there could be other languages through migration.
Actually, we have 200 native languages in Estonia spoken. Right. How we can manage in all these languages the education. But thank you for your comment. But Kerttu, maybe you want to add something? You had your own experience as a multilingual person, or not?
The monolingual lens that has been spoken today has got some coverage here. It's very difficult to give up, particularly, I think, among the general public. So I liked the paper by Sanita Lasdiņa before, in which she said that in Latvia, even if this multilingual lens is making its way to national policy, then it's the general public that is the most difficult to convince about the necessity to do things slightly differently than we have done so far.
Okay. But actually this multilingual families, I understand your talk about the educational system, but the meaning in concerning these documents is that if the multilingual family sends the children into the Estonian school, it would be problem. But the same situation in other countries. Families with a migrant background, with another home language, they are sending their children into the school with other language. And you show that there is no problems to get educated in state language, in official language, or not?
Yeah, so our data show that if you support the heritage language, if you support the other language other than the majority, this is not going to affect negatively the majority language. Of course, we have to bring that in the context of the study taking place in the UK. And in the UK, English is English we discussed today is a very strong language, and in other countries we have the fear that other languages may disappear. Of course, in the UK, English is the language, is the most important language, is so powerful that maybe this is the reason why if we support the heritage language, that doesn't affect negatively. That doesn't necessarily mean that we can transfer this to any other country. Because if we transfer this to a country where the majority language is not as strong and as prestigious and as powerful, that may have a negative effect. So I think that's important. What is the context?
The context is very important, and the attitudes concerning the language acquisition and the language prestige. And not only the state ideology, but on the grassroots level, that how prestigious is the language and how important is the acquisition of the language for the person or for the families and so on.
Yeah. And in the UK, because children learn English anyway, what we are recommending is that they have to support the heritage language, because otherwise they're not going to learn it. And anecdotally actually, I didn't present these data, but in the questionnaire we also asked the parents, are they better in English or in Greek? And for the majority, they said English. So the parents are aware. Anecdotally, in some of those families, the parents said that the children come back from school, they don't want to speak Greek because there is so much power in English, so the children are refusing to speak Greek. But when they go to the Greek school, because they had to go to the Greek school, then there is a benefit to English. So I think that's also the specific context.
Yes. Maybe audience would like to ask questions. Yes, we start here.
I'm really... Yep, I'll go with the questions. I have really long question. I will try to be as short as possible. When I see the human evolution, one of the way of survival that we are doing exchange through currency. So if you want to do exchange, you started with the currency evolution. And then, for example, the recent updates I am saying is a European currency. You can see the euro is one of the common currency, and maybe it have certain advantages. I just want to understand this human evolution, maybe after 200 years, 300 years, the way maybe uniting currency is helping somehow. I don't know how much. What can be the way uniting maybe somehow language, what we can do now? So if it is possible, so after 100 years, 200 years, something can be as beneficial as uniting euro currency, something like this?
Well, I think it's easier to share currency than because then you decide, okay, this is this one currency, let's create the euro, and then everyone that is part of the Eurozone can use the euro. I think that is, not possible to do it, unless we say, let's everyone speak English. But I don't think that this is something that people want, because the currency doesn't have the cultural identity that the language has. People may say also the currency has some cultural identity, and there are people in some Eurozone countries who miss the Deutsche Mark or the other local currencies, but it's different. It's not like a language that has an identity. Someone mentioned the Esperanto. Esperanto was a very good experiment, and Esperanto is still being used, but I'm not sure that it's been used as much as when it was created. When it was created, there was a buzz about Esperanto. And I'm not sure where we are now with Esperanto.
Well, there are 2 countries that are not members of the European Union that still use euro, so haven't they accepted some cultural values through accepting euro? So,
yeah.
But of course,
there are identity matters, but there are richness of the culture. That we have so many languages we can communicate, and I don't want to be without other languages and to use only one language, and I think all the audience are meaning the same.
I think on the issue of richness, the other important aspect is when there are many different languages in a country, but actually in education we only have 1 or 2, that means that the children who speak in the homes those other languages, and in some countries these are indigenous languages, if the indigenous languages are not within the educational system, then they're under threat, and then they may be dying out. This is what happens in India. A lot of languages, indigenous languages, are dying out because they are not part of the educational system. So children go to school, they don't learn. Some of them may not even be written languages. And so education has a very positive aspect, as we discussed in the morning, because if you have education, you get developed skills. But actually, in terms of indigenous languages or minority languages, it may have the opposite effect if these languages are not supported.
Okay, thank you. There was a question there.
Hello, thank you for so nice presentations. My name is Trine. And I had this comment about multilingual concerning context, because I lived for 10 years in Western and Central and Northern Europe, in Italy, in France, in Switzerland, in Norway, in Denmark for a while. So, and I always had to explain, even to the best traveled and best educated persons, that Estonia has its own identity and culture, because it was often associated with Russia, of course. So what I want to comment, maybe ask your opinion, that in some contexts maybe of course I agree that I want to teach to my children different languages, but the Russian maybe is not the first foreign language I'd like to teach, because then I go to Europe, and in Europe we know, actually I wanted to comment the first speaker who said that we spoke about this English, but he said that we should also give opportunity to different languages like French, Russian, German. Actually, on European context, it's not true, because we know the children in elementary or in secondary school, no one really studies Russia in Europe, in Western or Northern or Central Europe. So my comment is that on Estonian context, being as Estonian, which has been, the history occupied, and Russia is a huge, it's a huge nation and a huge identity. So as a tiny, after Iceland, I think it's the second tiniest European nation. So this multicultural, like when Estonian children now go to those kindergarten schools together with Russian children, and those Russian children still convey this identity that most of their families look from the Putin propaganda. They celebrate the darkest days of our history when we were occupied. They celebrate this as a liberation. And I really don't see why we really don't, we speak only about this multiculturalism, but we need to see the context. So in Estonian case, it has many disadvantages, I see, and the threats, which I see that we talk a little, only a little. So yeah, your comment on this Estonian context, considering the multiculturalism, as you know, in Tallinn, for example, we have only 52% Estonians, which is the tiniest speaking mother language Estonian in all the European capitals. We have more than 30% of Russian mother language speakers, which is the biggest with Latvia in all Europe. So in this context, speaking about multiculturalism and multi-languages, we really need to see the context. Yeah, so thank you.
Thank you for comments. Actually, I think nobody talking about no knowing of state language and not to preserving of Estonian language as an official language and the state language. I'm sure that Estonian school system is going to immerse the two type of the schools into the one type of the school. But actually, knowledge and other languages, knowledge of other cultures is always useful. And when we are looking what languages our children are studying at school, we can see that the first place is English as a foreign language, and the second place is coming Russian and not German, but Russian language. And I'm pretty sure that at university level, it's a very sad thing that our young historians, our young Vene-Ugrists don't know Russian language because they cannot work in their professional life very well without knowledge of language. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, the Soome-Ugri is a very good example because we see what has happened with Soome-Ugri in Russia. They have basically died out, our Soome-Ugri tribes in Russia, what you mentioned. And that was my real comment, that I really wanted to say that, of course, I'm not talking about studying Russia as a language. Of course, it is a language of Dostoevsky and Pushkin, everything. But I spoke more about this integration part, that if you create those common schools where maybe 30 or 50%, which is the reality in Tallinn, you have only 52% of Estonians. So the reality is that half of those students would be Russian mother tongue. That was, and with Russian mother tongue, they convey this identity, who listens to Putin's propaganda, most, not all, of course there are many people who don't, but mostly, and who celebrate those saddest days for our history as the days of victory, etc. You know, the background. So what my point was that in some contexts, the language, the identity, and let's say the cultural background that one culture conveys cannot be only enriching.
You want to comment? No?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is also a political issue. And so it's inevitable that politics always play a role when it comes to languages. And when we see what happened in the past, I'm not very familiar with the Estonian context, but if we look at the UK context, where Welsh, for example, was not supported in the schools and people were not allowed to speak Welsh, then Welsh almost disappeared. And then there is now a revival because Welsh came back to the schools. And so we see examples all across the world that a language policy may affect positively or may affect negatively. And then we have countries like in Canada with the Francophone and the Anglophone, or in Switzerland where it's the Francophone and the German and the Italian, where they decided what languages will be spoken in the school, and that then the other communities have to learn the other language as a subject. And so there are ways around, but there's always also a political issue there, and then the country has to decide what the country wants for the future. And this is a political, I think, discussion that needs to be done within Estonia, rather than because this is happening in the UK, let's do the same thing, or because this is happening in Canada, let's do the same thing. There has to be some debate, I think, within Estonia to come to a conclusion for this.
In the university setting, I was surprised when I talked to the students that they quite often saw Russian just as a foreign language that they need in the labor market in Estonia. So it's a foreign language they wish to study. They wish to have a better command of. They were sorry that they were not so fluent in Russian. No ideological connotations there. So
I am agree on university level. At university level, the classes for Russian, they are full because the students want to study Russian language. There is no political reason. The language as a language. And as I told, for some specialities, it's a very big need to know Russian, but not only Russian. It's very pity that we don't have a good knowledge of German language now in humanities. When I studied at Tartu University, it was the last century. And then was so that all Estonian philologists in our curricula, it was German lessons, German courses. And even for those students, they are coming from the schools without German knowledge, they started to study German. Now for philologists, for historians, no German, not at all. And then it's very sad. But now we have last minute, maybe one short question.
I'll make it brief. So I'm speaking as a researcher here. I'm coming back to this money and language metaphor because language is a very different thing. It is the language of my mother's lullabies. It's like grandmother's pancakes, and maybe someone's first love is in another language, and so all those emotions are related to languages. And then we have those practical that Birute said. Practical languages, we just learn them because we need them. But I wanted sort of to throw a challenge to this board that we now in education we have children that are not bilingual but who are trilingual, who have lived in many countries and who come to schools with this rich, very rich background and baggage of languages. And for a small country like Estonia, this is an advantage. This is something we should profit from, but it is a huge challenge both for our competence that we have at school for our teachers who are not so trilingual themselves, maybe, and for our finances. So please, if you could comment on how to deal with the situation of 3 or 4 lingual children, that is the modern reality. Thank you.
In terms of having trilingual or children who speak 4 languages, that doesn't mean that the school has to provide teachers who speak all those different languages. But it's important that the teachers are sensitive and the teachers know that they have this one child in the classroom who also speaks Turkish, and there is this other child who also speaks Arabic, because every language is a resource. And the teacher can make use of those resources in the classroom by saying, so how is this object or how is this term in that language, and how is that in the other language? Because this is from a self-esteem perspective and from emotional perspective, it also gives value to the language and gives value to the child. And so if the teachers receive some training about how to deal with multilingual classrooms, that would be hugely effective. They don't have to speak all those languages, but some training about multilingual classrooms, I think, would be very beneficial.
So, thank you very much, Kerttu, thank you very much, Theo, and thank you for audience.